What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Weekly GCap, the only source you'll ever need to catch up on all the gaming news from the last week. As per usual, we have quite a couple stories to go through. In fact, we have more stories to go through this week than in any other episode of Weekly GCap. I'm gonna try to keep up the pace. I'm gonna try to keep this under 30 minutes. So if it seems like the segments are a bit briefer than usual, then that's why. But anyways, first things first, going back on a story that we talked about last week, that Far Cry 5 update ended up coming out. This coming from the official Ubisoft Twitter account, quote, "Happy 5th Far Cry 5. We're celebrating with a native 60 FPS update for PS5 and Xbox Series consoles and a free weekend from March 23rd to the 27th on all consoles and PC." Which means, yeah, by the time that you guys are seeing this video, the free weekend is actually happening right now, and I do highly recommend diving in and at least trying out the game. Honestly, you could probably beat it during the weekend. Personally, I beat the game in a span of about 2 to 3 days back at launch, and I had a blast from start to finish. So if you've even just been slightly wanting to dive into the game, I highly recommend it. And another thing worth noting is that on the Series X and the PS5, it seems to be running at a native 4K 60 FPS, whereas on the Series S, it's running at 1080p 60 FPS. So if you're playing on one of the new consoles, then you'll be able to look forward to playing the game with some prettier graphics and better frame rates. While we're talking about updates, Sonic Frontiers has some free DLC that is actually out by the time that you guys are seeing this video. This coming from the Tales Channel Twitter account, quote, "Here's what to expect in sight, sounds, and speed. Sonic Frontiers' first post-release package, a photo mode, jukebox mode, and 2 challenge modes." Then there's a picture right below that which reads, "Photo mode, pause and take screenshots with a free-to-move camera. Jukebox mode, 13 tracks of your favorite Sonic songs, gather sound memories across Starfield Islands to unlock 40 additional tracks. Challenge modes, fight multiple bosses against the clock in Battle Rush, speed through cyberspace and time attack action in Cyberspace Challenge." So yeah, again, by the time that you guys are watching this video, the DLC is already out, so if you have the game, you can just go download the update and try it out. Personally, I haven't gotten to play Sonic Frontiers, nor do I own the game, though I must say, it's pretty nice that they're just giving all this DLC away for free. Most games would be charging for a season pass or like, you know, at least 15 to 20 bucks for all this content, but they're just giving it out, which I think is pretty cool. Now, we had quite a couple of new game announcements and release dates announcements happen this last week. So for the first one, there was a Toxic Crusaders beat 'em up announced. This game seems to be basically along the same lines, think like a Streets of Rage or a Turtles in Time or a TMNT Shredder's Revenge from last year. For those of you that don't know, Toxic Crusaders was a cartoon back in the 90s. Honestly, Toxic Crusaders was pretty underrated, man. I don't hear people talk about it enough. There's no release date for this game yet, but it looks absolutely awesome. Next up, Persona 5 The Phantom X was announced. A trailer was released for it, and it actually looks pretty good. This is a free-to-play mobile game, though there's a possibility of it going to PC later on. That being said, it is a mobile game, so expect the usual in-app purchases, microtransactions, possible gacha mechanics. It's only been announced to release in China so far. There's no confirmation on a worldwide release, but considering it's a Persona game, not releasing it worldwide would literally be throwing away money considering how big that this franchise is now, so I'm sure that we'll see it announced for other parts of the world soon enough. Next up, the Crash Team Rumble release date was announced. This is that like arena hero game that was announced a little while ago. So there's going to be a closed beta happening from April 20th to April 24th, and to get access to it, you have to pre-order the game, but the full game will be releasing June 20th, 2023. Next up, this is the announcement that I'm actually most excited for, LEGO 2K Drive. To me, this is kind of looking like LEGO Forza Horizon. If y'all know me, then you know I'm a sucker for the LEGO games, so I'm definitely going to be picking this up. One thing to note though, it's going to be $70 on the PS5 and the Series X and S. However, it'll only be $60 for the PS4, the Xbox One, the Switch, and the PC, which I thought that was kind of interesting considering the PC is kind of on that same next-gen tier as the PS5 and Series X, yet the PC version only costs $60. I don't know, I just thought that that was a little interesting. And then there's also going to be other pre-order bonuses, one for $100 and the other one for $120, each one coming with respective bonuses like season passes and cards and stuff like that. So if any of that interests you, then you can go ahead and pick up one of those special editions. Regardless, you already know I'll be diving into this one on day one on May 19th. Our last announcement is Counter-Strike 2. This coming from Counter-Strike directly, quote, "The next era of Counter-Strike begins this summer. Counter-Strike 2 is the largest technical leap forward in Counter-Strike's history, ensuring new features and updates for years to come. All of the game's new features will be revealed when it officially launches this summer, but the road to Counter-Strike 2 begins today as a limited test for select CSGO players. During the testing period, we'll be evaluating a subset of features to shake out any issues before the worldwide release. Counter-Strike 2 arrives this summer as a free upgrade to CSGO. CSGO. So build your loadout, hone your skills, and prepare yourself for what's next. Man, I used to love CSGO back in the day. I played it on PC, and then I played it a ton on Xbox 360 with my friends. I'm gonna be honest, I fell off of this game years ago, but I'm very excited for Counter-Strike 2, and I'll definitely be checking it out when it launches this summer. Next up, Redfall previews have gone live. I haven't watched any because I'm avoiding as many spoilers as possible, but the feedback seems pretty positive so far, and the game looks great. It's currently being described as a crossover between Borderlands and Far Cry, which sounds very interesting. Another thing worth noting, though, is that they're backtracking on the whole, like, always online requirement that they had announced a couple months ago. Thank God. So you will indeed be able to play the game solo and offline, which is always a good thing. And honestly, every game should be playable offline, unless it's like a multiplayer, like always online, live service-centered game. But even then, I always feel like games should be at least somewhat playable to an extent offline, even if it's just like a basic tutorial or some sort of like warm-up match type mode. Like, I don't know, it's just, there's something about a game having to be like always online and no way to play the game unless you have the internet connection that just, it feels wrong. Especially for those that just want to play a game offline, or maybe for those that don't have internet, because you gotta remember, that still happens in the world. Like, some people just don't have access to internet, or they can't afford it. Like I said, even if it's just like a basic tutorial mode for people to try the game, or some sort of like warm-up type mode offline, I feel like every game should have at least some sort of feature like that, just so people can at least play the game to some capacity offline. But anyways, I'm super excited to try this one out, and I'll be diving in on day 1 on May 2nd. Next up, a new Last of Us game reveal is coming later this year. This coming from MP First, quote, Druckmann acknowledges the fan request for The Last of Us 3, but adds in that the studio has already decided on their next project after The Last of Us multiplayer. While Druckmann didn't confirm or deny it's The Last of Us 3, he did state that the next game they're working on is something the entire studio is excited for, though he can't talk about it just yet. Then Druckmann says, and I quote, so I know the fans really want The Last of Us Part 3. I hear about it all the time, and all I could say is that, look, we're already on to our next project, so the decision has already been made. I can't say what it is, but that's the process we went through, that there was a lot of consideration of different things, and we picked the thing we were most excited for. I'm sorry if it sounds like I was kind of stuttering during that. I think there might have been a few typos or errors in here in terms of the grammatical structure of some of these sentences, so I was just trying to piece it together as I was reading it. After that quote, Greg Miller, one of the Spoilercast hosts, mentioned that Factions, which was what the multiplayer mode of The Last of Us 1 was called, is somewhere in there, to which Druckmann replied that people will hear more about it later this year. He then goes on to say, and I quote, The Last of Us multiplayer game is our next big title, and you will hear much more about it later this year, and I'm stoked for it. End quote. So, personally, I just really want a Last of Us Part 3, if I'm gonna be honest. Like, on one hand, the way the story ended in Part 2 was honestly a good place to leave it at, but on the other, I feel like there's definitely more potential there for Ellie to embark on a new adventure in the future. While the multiplayer game sounds cool, admittedly, like, I really play these games for their stories, and you tend to not get much of that from multiplayer games. Sure, some games have pulled it off, and in fact, it can work quite well, but for the most part, when you think multiplayer game, you think, yeah, I don't know, Warzone, GTA, Fortnite, Apex, etc. And while, yes, those games try to intertwine stories with their live service model and their multiplayer mechanics, it's just, you know, it's not the same as getting engrossed in, like, one front-to-back single-player experience. However, with it being a Last of Us game, and considering The Last of Us 1 and 2 are in my top 5 games of all time, I'll definitely be checking out this multiplayer Last of Us game when it drops, and I'll be keeping my fingers crossed for Last of Us Part 3 to follow shortly after. This next story honestly makes me really sad, but EA is going to be delisting Bad Company 1 and 2 and Battlefield 1943. This coming from EA, quote, as we close in on 15 years since the release of Battlefield 1943 and Bad Company 1 and 2, we are announcing that their journey is coming to an end. Starting April 28th, 2023, Battlefield 1943, Battlefield Bad Company 1 and 2 will be removed from digital storefronts, and you will no longer be able to purchase them. This is in preparation for the retirement of the online services for these titles, which will happen on December 8th, 2023. For Bad Company 1 and 2, you can still continue playing them and use the respective offline features, such as the single-player campaign. You can also read our FAQ and service updates for further information on the retirement of online services. While these titles hold a special place in our heart, we're now looking forward to creating new memories alongside you as we shift our focus towards our current and future Battlefield experiences. With this announcement, we also want to take a moment today to reflect on our time with Battlefield 1943 and Bad Company 1 and 2. We share amazing memories of not only their development, but also playing them aside you. End quote. So, yeah, this one, honestly, this makes me so sad. I have so many great memories with all of these games, but, you know, it's only an inevitability that as the more time passes, more and more of these older multiplayer game servers will unfortunately be shut down. Personally, I don't see the point in delisting it. Like, sure, the online servers will will be down, but they even said it themselves in this post. Like, there's still a single player campaign that you can play offline. Not to mention the fact that both Bad Company 1 and 2's campaigns are absolutely phenomenal. I'm a huge supporter of video game preservation, and once again, this is just another major step in the wrong direction. I mean, I won't go on that whole tangent now because Lord knows I could talk about it for hours, if not days and weeks on end, but all I'll say is that I highly recommend picking these games up before they get delisted. Next up, this story kind of irked me a little bit, but Ubisoft is using AI to create NPC dialogue. They put out a video showing off this new tool that allows them to use AI to generate dialogue for the NPCs in their games, which then a human developer, can go through and pick like which dialogue option they feel like sounds the best or sounds the most human to them. So basically, like, the AI does the work and then the humans just pick out which one sounds the most realistic, and I just, oh god. You're seeing the video on your screen now, and yeah, I do not like this. The minute you bring AI into it, the minute it stops being art. I don't care what anyone says, AI art is not art. Video games are indeed art. So when you start having an AI develop that art for you, it strips away the humanity that makes art the beautiful thing that it is. This honestly, like, infuriates me, and it spits in the face of the ideals, integrity, and fundamentals of the video game medium. It is nothing short of lazy, unnecessary, and another big AAA company finding quote-unquote innovative ways to cut corners and get these games out faster to get more money in their pockets. I could, and admittedly, I do want to go on, but this show's jam-packed with stories as is, so I won't linger on this one for too long. I wanted to at least bring it up, as this is honestly quite scary for the future of gaming. On a lighter note, the Completionist purchased every Wii U/3DS game. As most of you probably know, on March 27th, the Wii U and 3DS eShops will be closing forever. So the Completionist decided to purchase every single game on each of their respective eShops. It costed him well over like $20,000. I won't say too much because I don't want to spoil anything. Like, it's definitely a video that you should just go watch for yourself. Also to note, it took literal terabytes to store all of these games. Again, I highly recommend going to check out the video. I'll have it linked in the description. It was a very entertaining watch. It's that time of the week where I warn you guys about the rest of the show being Microsoft Activision acquisition drama. Yeah, usually it happens later in the show, but I believe we're probably at most at the halfway point of the show right now. So yeah, literally the second half of the show is literally just going to be Microsoft Activision acquisition drama. It's 5 stories. It is literally 5 stories. So if you're one of the people that happens to be sick about hearing about all this drama, then you're free to click off the video. I totally understand. But for the rest of you that are interested in hearing it, well, strap in, because again, it is 5 stories pertaining to this news. So first, 6 different studios approved the Microsoft Activision deal. This coming from Video Games Chronicle, quote, UK regulator posts 6 studios' responses to Microsoft Activision deal, all saying it should go ahead. None of the responses posted said that the deal should be blocked. Now, there is a lot to read here, so rather than read for the next 10 minutes, I'm just gonna sum it up for you guys. So, the first studio basically said that Microsoft has honored all of their agreements in the past, specifically with Minecraft. Then the second one basically said that they don't believe any title can be considered a must-have in the interactive gaming markets, considering that every consumer is different and every consumer has different tastes and preferences, and considering that Microsoft already said and has signed agreements to keep certain games on other platforms, they don't think Microsoft's deal will negatively impact consumers. That's just the short summed up version, because otherwise I would have been sitting here reading for the next 10 minutes, but yeah, like I've been saying since day one, this deal most likely will go through. Like, I'm 99.9999% sure of that. And yeah, needless to say, this is just another step in the right direction. Next up, Sony uses Starfield against Microsoft. I won't dwell on this one for too long, but this coming from Charlie Intel on Twitter, quote, Sony also mentions that Bethesda announced Starfield and New Elder Scrolls in 2018 as multi-platform games, and then Xbox made it exclusive post-acquisition, and says Microsoft can do the same with COD since COD has annual releases, unlike Minecraft. End quote. So, to be fair, when both of these games were announced, like when you go back and watch those release trailers, neither of them had PlayStation logos under them. In fact, they did not have any logos underneath of them. So while yes, it is probably true that these were intended to be multi-platform before the acquisition, technically speaking, there's not any publicly available proof that it was, nor was there any announcements explicitly stating that it would be on PlayStation, so they don't have any tangible proof to back up this statement, whereas Microsoft could just point out exactly what I just said and it would be totally valid. It's almost comical when Sony talks about exclusive games and exclusive content, especially when it comes to COD, because for those of you that don't know, they're currently in an agreement with Activision that gives them marketing rights to Call of Duty, and on top of that, they get tons of exclusive content on their platform. They've literally had full full game modes that were only accessible on PlayStation for the first year of the game being out. So for example, the survival mode in MW 2019, you could only get that mode on PlayStation for the first year that that game was out until Cold War released. The same thing happened with the Onslaught mode in Cold War. And then even beyond that, PlayStation gets tons of free skins, bundles, camos, blueprints, etc. But Xbox and PC players have absolutely zero way of accessing that content. Yet Sony still complains about exclusive games and content being unfair. Anyways, moving on from that drama just for one moment, Microsoft is planning to launch their own app store. This coming from Eurogamer, quote, Microsoft is planning to launch its own app store for games across mobile devices, according to Phil Spencer. In March 2024, new rules are expected under the EU's Digital Markets Act, which will require Apple and Google to open their mobile platforms to all stores owned and operated by other companies. Microsoft aims to capitalize on this with its own Xbox platform, for which its proposed purchase of Activision Blizzard is a key element. Now, while I definitely think that this is a good thing, you know, for like smaller developers or maybe indie developers or just, you know, for other game developers and publishers, period, to be more inclined to get their games and experiences onto the mobile platform, my one concern is that could this slowly start to become like how PC is now, with us having to have like, I don't know, 30 plus launchers and stores downloaded at all times that we constantly have to sort through. I mean, again, regardless, I do think that this is a good thing for developers and such, obviously, but it makes me a little worried as to if this will get out of hand or not in the way that it is on PC, because let's not kid ourselves, it is most definitely out of hand on PC. Oh, you want to play some PC games? Well, pick a launcher. Do you want the Ubisoft Plus launcher? Do you want the Rockstar launcher? Do you want Battle.net? Do you want Epic Games? Do you want the Steam? Do you want the, like, it's a little crazy. But anyway, back to the Microsoft and Sony drama. So, Microsoft says that 10 years is enough for Sony to develop a COD alternative, which, hey, that's what I've been saying all along. Microsoft literally stole my line, man. I've said that so many times on this show. I'm just kidding. I mean, it's obvious. 10 years is more than enough to develop a COD alternative. Like, Sony themselves actually already proved that, because in 2005, Killzone 1 released, and then in 2011, Killzone 3 released, which means that in a 6-year span, they made 3 incredible games. Actually, 4 if you count the PSP game. Anyway, this coming from Video Games Chronicle, quote, Microsoft considers that a period of 10 years is sufficient for Sony as a leading publisher and console platform to develop alternatives to COD. Now, there's way more to this, but this is just like the main point that I wanted to focus on here. This is exactly what I've been saying from the start. Like, 10 years is more than enough time for Sony to bring back an old FPS IP or just straight up create a new one to compete with COD if they're truly that scared. Which again, mind you, none of that would even be necessary in the first place, considering Phil Spencer has said multiple times now that Microsoft has no plans to take COD from PlayStation or any platform for that matter, and I feel like the agreements they've signed recently with Nintendo, Nvidia, Boosteroid, Ubisoft should be proof of that. Not only does Sony have tons of like massive IPs for them to rely on, but they also have a lot of buried IPs that they can rely on, especially shooters. Prime example that we were just talking about a few moments ago, Killzone. They buried that game. They haven't released an entry since Shadowfall. Do I know why? No. Do I wish they bring it back? Of course. Not to mention the absolutely fantastic Resistance games. And that's just scratching the surface. Again, Sony has so many IPs that they can rely on if they're truly that scared of Xbox taking COD away from them, which they already said that they wouldn't be, but not to mention the fact that now they own Bungie. You want to know what Bungie created? Halo. Could you imagine if Bungie got to making an FPS game and they released a Halo 3 tier game that came out around the same time as like an upcoming Call of Duty? That would be some stiff competition right there. We'll move on from this story now, but I just thought it was funny that Microsoft kind of called out Sony and said exactly what everybody else on the internet has been saying. Now, this next one gets a little controversial, so bear with me here. Microsoft canceled Redfall for the PlayStation 5. This coming from Push Square, quote, Vampire FPS Redfall was in development for PS5 but was canned after Xbox buyout. Now, this is coming from an interview that happened between IGN France and the creative director of Redfall, Harvey Smith, quote, we got bought out by Microsoft and it was changed with a capital C. They came in and said, no PS5, we're focusing on Xbox, PC, and Game Pass. Smith added that he believes it's not a big deal and is actually a good decision. He said it helps support Game Pass and have one less platform to worry about, one less complexity. Now, some people will obviously look at this through the lens of, oh, see, Microsoft is already taking games away from Sony, just imagine what'll happen once they own Activision, but the difference here is that this game wasn't even announced before the PS5 version was canned, meaning that similar to the Starfield situation, situation, it wasn't a situation where it was already announced to the public and then they reversed course on it, but rather something that was canned mid-development before the public even knew about the game. People can still try to use this as an example in their arguments when it comes to whether or not Microsoft would take away games from PlayStation, but admittedly, this is a completely different situation and a completely different size and scope of game. Like, we all know Microsoft's exclusives output lately has been rather lackluster to say the least. Meanwhile, Sony is pumping out exclusives left, right, and center and has been doing nothing but thriving off of it. So while yes, it may seem scummy that Microsoft yanked the cord on the PlayStation version, you also have to remember that they're just doing what they can to compete from an exclusive standpoint. Because again, when it comes to the war of exclusives, Microsoft is slacking pretty hard. Like, they've had some good games from the last couple years. Like, personally, I enjoyed Halo Infinite, though obviously the multiplayer is a little lacking. Forza Horizon 5 is already being heralded as like one of the best racing games of all time, so I mean, that's a good one. But when you compare it to Sony's output lately, yeah, it's not even close. Making Redfall an exclusive is nothing compared to making Call of Duty exclusive. That's what the internet does, though. They take one little story and blow it up to seem way worse than it is. But you know what? I'm sure Sony will do the exact same thing. It honestly wouldn't surprise me if we hear about them using Starfield and Redfall scrap PS5 versions as ammunition in their court battles. As per usual, I'll keep you guys updated on all the Microsoft Activision acquisition drama as soon as we know more. But yeah, that's all the stories I got for you this week. Now I want to hear from you guys. Have you gotten to try the new Far Cry 5 update? And are you going to be playing the Sonic Frontiers DLC? Are you excited for any of the new games that were announced? And what are your thoughts on the whole EA Delisting Battlefield situation? And as per usual, do you have any thoughts on the whole Microsoft Activision acquisition drama? Whatever it is, I'd love to hear from you guys. But yeah, that's that. That's Weekly GCap, the only source you'll ever need to catch up on all the gaming news from the last week. These episodes go live every single Friday at 9 a.m. Eastern, so if you want to catch them as soon as they go live, well then, now you know where to be here. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. Have an amazing day and an amazing weekend. Stay beautiful. I love you all. Peace.